Published in 2017 by Canadian-American author Fonda Lee, Jade City is a fantasy novel set in an Asian-inspired island nation amid boiling political strife and street war between the country's two largest family clans. Included on Time's 2022 list of the best fantasy books of all time, Jade City is the first of a gangster trilogy called the Green Bone Saga. The book currently sits at 4.1 stars out of 5 on Goodreads, a score accumulated from over 59,000 ratings. The story primarily follows members of the Kaul family of the No Peak clan on the island of Kikan as they struggle to maintain and protect their family territory within the city of Janloon from the encroachment of the aggressive rival Mountain Clan, run by the Ait family. Jade stone production is the city's most precious resource because it allows warriors to harness magical powers for wartime use. There are these highly trained warriors that are exposed to jade in small doses, which gives them 6 different magical, supernatural fighting abilities: deflection, perception, lightness, channeling, strength, and steel. Rival clan academies on the island train young students in these 6 abilities with the hopes of utilizing them in their own clan armies. But unfortunately, political corruption has allowed for a flourishing black market of jade trade and a street drug that allows anyone to harness jade magic, not just the trained warriors. So the Kaul family begins to lose their grip on their own territory in the city to this drug and waves of violence. So the plot follows the 3 Kaul grandchildren desperately attempting to survive in the face of overtures of the Mountain Clan, who resort to kidnapping and murder. Potential family traitors abound, and the family fights battles in both the streets and in political boardrooms. By the end of the book, readers learn the fate of the No Peak clan and witness the desperate measures taken for their survival. The author of this book is Fonda Lee, who is herself a martial artist with black belts in both Kung Fu and Karate, and she also holds an MA from Stanford University. Fonda Lee has published multiple recognized books for both adults and young adults and has several upcoming projects, including a collaboration with the daughter of famed martial arts actor Bruce Lee. So what is the writing like in this book? I think that Fonda Lee is an excellent writer, and her prose really communicates emotion and setting and the lore in this really vivid language. The magic in Kikan emanates from jade, and yet the magic system is not really the focus of the story. Instead, it's about the personality clashes and the personal cost that come from these bitter clan rivalries and this threat, this impending doom of political meltdown. Those are the main problems for our characters. And so in this story, even though magic is present, it's a means to a bigger end, not the end itself. There are short folklore chapters interspersed throughout the narrative that provide mythological history for the mythology of Kikan, and they give the reader clues as to the nature of jade and magic in this world. When it comes to the mood of the novel, I think it's one of suspense and excitement, and eventually the feeling of dread sets in. The narrative is very often punctuated by scenes of very quick and fast action. Characters are ambushed by bullies or enemies, and sudden death of at least one of the main characters warns readers that actually you should not get too comfortable with any of the protagonists. The fight scenes are much more like real life. They are over just as quickly as they begin, and there are certain inevitable confrontations that lead the reader to feel many of the same feelings as the protagonists, which are primarily dread and nervousness and anger. When we're looking at themes in this book, there are 2 obvious themes in Jade City. The first is family, and the second is power. The Ka'ul family of the No Peak clan are vulnerable, both from within and without. They're having all sorts of problems. The patriarch of the clan is aging, his son is dead, and so his 3 grandchildren have to figure out a way to set aside their own personal differences and their own personal ambitions to strengthen their family's political influence before they are totally destroyed by stronger and less scrupulous forces. There are the 2 eldest children, Lan and Ilo. They are both brothers with 2 very different philosophies of war. Lan is a peacemaker and is driven by meditation, whereas Ilo is a street lord who would rather settle a conflict with violence. The third heir, Shay, has just returned home from traveling outside of the island, and she is torn between helping her brothers rebuild the clan and finding a life on her own outside of the influence of her own family's politics. The ideal family is generally more rigid in Asian cultures, which tend to be based on honor and shame rather than the Western values of guilt and innocence. And so it's no surprise that the family unity is painted as the more desirable outcome. The second theme I mentioned is power, and each character must choose how they will wield both the political and magical power they have inherited from their family clan. The narrative presents dozens of choices to the protagonist and drives home the reality and the feeling that these political choices often cannot be undone once they are set into motion. This book is a high-stakes book, and Jade City illustrates how burdensome political and family power can be to those who just want to live a simple and inoffensive life. Speaking of which, let's talk about the characters. So, both of the themes of family and power are central to the character of each of these protagonists and even the antagonist in this story. And I'm really glad that almost all of the characters in this novel have somewhat of an arc. Some are more predictable than others, like Ilo, the street fighter, but Shay's arc and her adopted cousin, Andon, they are much less predictable. The high schooler orphan, Andon, is a No Peak clan member by adoption, and his struggles with his sexuality and the emotional piece of both being adopted and the burdensome feelings that come with warrior training kind of color his juvenile view of war and conflict. Every character feels like a real person, and the real possibility of some of the characters dying urges readers to persist to the end to see if their favorites survive this conflict. And speaking of which, that ties in nicely with the pacing. The story moves very quick, but it is punctuated by moments of calm, which feels very Eastern. Violent battles give way to quiet moments and gardens, and the balance works. One feature of the Asian aesthetic that is so appealing is frequent use of contrasts. You have the elderly sage quietly tending his garden, and suddenly he's leaping across the battlefield. Or you have a samurai meditating by a river who suddenly grabs a fish from the water. I find that the extremes of calm and chaos in the Eastern style really work in this sort of storytelling and in Jade City. Now, let's talk about the tropes. There's one significant trope in Jade City, and it's called fantasy counterpart culture. This is when an author bases cultures in their fantasy world on real-world nations and cultures. Usually fantasy counterpart culture is done in satire, but here it seems to be done more for convenience. So what am I talking about? So the island nation of this world is kind of a mishmash of various Asian cultures, which are now living in the shadow of a recent worldwide war. So this is a pretty clear comparison to the island of Japan after World War II. And this can be a double-edged trope. On one hand, it can really help with immersion because we're reading a story with a real-life analog that we have seen with our own eyes and with a real history that many of us know. So it makes immersion a little bit easier. But on the other hand, it can really come across as ham-fisted if the comparisons are too obvious. it might risk pulling you out of the story to where you're not thinking about Kikon, but you're actually thinking about Japan. And so fortunately, I don't think that's the case here, because Fonda Lee seems really content to focus on the story of this local clan war instead of critiquing real-world nations like China or the United States. There are several other tropes like addictive magic and supernatural martial arts, but honestly, they all work for me. It's a good book. In conclusion, Jade City is a promising novel that takes the best of generic Asian culture from media like Avatar: The Last Airbender, and it marries it with the best of the mafia tropes. There are moments of unexpected action and violence keep the pace moving along, but the soft, tranquil moments also allow readers to stop and smell the lotus on occasion. For these reasons and the rest mentioned in my review, I give Jade City 5 stars out of 5. This is a must-read book. Thank you for listening. I hope you enjoyed. If you like what you heard here, please subscribe, and I'll catch you in the next video.